Welcome to What's My Tagline, a show where we put the microphone in front of the people who are typically behind the scenes, those responsible for marketing, sales, social media, PR, and event management. Well, hello. Welcome to today's episode of What's My Tagline. I'm your host, Carol Flagg. Thanks for tuning in today. Super excited about my guest. I'm chatting with Kriste Goad. She's a founder and Chief Firestarter at Fuoco, a truly innovative marketing agency. I had a pleasure of meeting Kriste at the Sway Marketing Conference in May in Atlanta and got to know her a little bit. And now I've got her on the show. Kriste also hosts her own podcast called How It's Done, a podcast for curious marketers. What a great tagline there. Kriste, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Carol. I'm so glad that we met each other, and I'm so glad to be here today.
Yeah. That was first of all, Sway was a great event, right? And
So good.
yeah.
I mean, when they say it's a marketing community, it's so true. It really is. I felt like I got all these new friends.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and for listeners who aren't familiar with Sway, please check it out. It's SWAA, the Sway Health event. It was in Atlanta in May. You'll find plenty of Google results back on that, and check it out if you're a healthcare marketer. It was really terrific.
And come next year.
Yeah. So and come next year, which I think they're talking about is going to happen. I think back by me on the West Coast, maybe San Diego or something like that. Wouldn't that be nice?
Every location that they mentioned that they were looking at on the West Coast all sounded really lovely to me.
Yeah, I think I'm going to push that just from a marketing standpoint, and maybe it'll go viral. Like, oh, Sway's in Atlanta, Sway's in San Diego, make it happen.
Love San Diego. Love it.
Me too. So we have a lot to sort of talk about today. Very excited to be, a kind of continuing this conversation that was a big part of Sway, which was AI, using and specifically generative AI in marketing and communications. It was quite the topic, and you and I chatted briefly about it as well. But before we talk about that, as you know, my first question of all my guests is if you had to describe yourself as a tagline, what would it be?
I really love that question, Carol. And I even consulted generative AI and trying to come up with that.
Chat GPT, please create a tagline for me.
So what I've come up with, and we'll talk about this later, is not what, Chat GPT spit out, but it did give me some ideas that I used. So I came up with, since my agency is Fuoco, which is Italian for fire, and my title is Chief Firestarter, my tagline is sparking creativity, igniting powerful narratives.
Ooh.
Yes, because the story is so important.
Yeah.
To everything.
It's so interesting, and we'll make sure we get your website out there as we close out our conversation. But everything about your Chief Firestarter and ignite and Fuoco in Italian, like you said, means fire. But you carry that theme throughout your entire website and messaging, which of course is what every good marketer should do. So I think that is perfect, and I'm so glad that ChatGPT did not come up with that for you. So.
No, but it really did help me, I guess I was trying to hone in on it. So
yeah. Again, exactly. And I think that we both have stuff to say about that process as well, and using generative AI. But I jumped the gun. Before we actually talk about that, give our audience a peek into your journey. I mean,
yeah.
What got you to the point of starting your own agency, starting your own marketing company, and the work that you're doing now? What led up to that?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question. And as I was, just kind of thinking through my answer, I was actually working on an award entry for a client last week. And she's the founder of her company. And one thing she said, I was like, oh, I think that's true for me too. She said, your career is generally divided into a third, a third, a third. And when I started thinking about the pivot points in my career, I guess I'm on the what could be the final third, who knows? But I started my career as a journalist, and that first pivot was from journalism to becoming a speechwriter and press secretary for the Tennessee governor at the time. So I was a member of the governor's cabinet, and
Oh,
yeah, and that was wild, and fun, and I learned so much. And then the pivot from there, from politics to corporate, and I went to work when I left the governor's office for a company called Healthways, which the brand Healthways doesn't even exist anymore. There's been acquisitions and all kinds of, transitions for that company. But at the time, it was the largest publicly traded disease management company in the country. And I came in to lead their corp comms, and they had never had anybody in-house doing that. So that was a huge pivot. That was probably the biggest pivot for me, I would say, because I had never worked in corporate. I studied journalism in college, and that's all I had, really ever done. And then, working in the governor's office was a lot closer to journalism than it probably was to corporate moms, in a lot of ways. But
in some ways, yeah.
I had to learn about what it meant to be a publicly traded company and all of everything that comes with that. And then at the time, they were also really forging new ground in the area called disease management. And so my boss at the time was president of the Disease Management Association of America. So, there was just so much going on, and they were in this niche of healthcare that was B2B, and our clients were health plans, large self-insured employer groups, and hospitals. And then we partnered with all these other, different folks in the healthcare space. And that's where I really got deep into healthcare B2B because of that experience. And then when I left there, I pivoted into agency. And I've worked at 3 agencies now, if you count my own. And the first was a little bit more generalist and a little bit of a kind of combination PR, public affairs. And then the second agency, I came in on the client account side, and stepped into the largest client that they had ever had at the time, which was UPMC out of
Oh, huge. Yeah.
Pittsburgh. And so that was wild. And then that agency really specialized in this niche area at the time called what we called managed care contract negotiation, kind of guerrilla communications tactics. So like that was crazy, and a whole different pivot. And then I was chief marketing and business development officer. And then they were acquired. And when I left there, I made a pivot that I never anticipated or set out to do, which was started my own agency. And I started out just as an independent consultant, and it just grew,
Yeah.
pretty quickly, just because I had been in the space for a long time and I had a lot of relationships. And so then I opened an agency, and I became a founder and an owner and all that comes with that, which I thought I knew what that looked like, but had no idea. So those have been that's my career journey. That's how I got here today as owner of Fuoco. And then since then, I went out on my own in 2017, and then in 2019 hired my first actual employee, as an agency. And then we've just been going ever since. And so we remain a boutique healthcare B2B agency. So we're very specialized, and I like being a boutique agency. And then when we need to bring more firepower to our client engagements, we'll go out and get either other agency partners that specialize in different things that we don't, and bring on freelancers and contract support. So yeah, that's the journey.
Yeah, yeah. And again, more firepower, again, getting
I
back
know,
to,
I'm
yeah,
sorry
you,
for all
oh
the
no,
heavy
yeah, yeah,
language.
you have to, right? I mean, it's that's part of being, a marketer. They mean finding a thread everywhere you can, right? And
It's actually really fun to do,
yeah,
yeah.
to do that, yeah. And then, and I'm fine with idioms and puns too. I love that. So, if those are in abundance as well. then you started a podcast. When your podcast, I've listened to several episodes, and of course, the one that we're going to be diving down into a little bit here shortly. How it's done, a podcast for curious marketers. That's interesting because you would think that all marketers would be curious, but in my career, I've certainly come across a few that, or several, that
You're
really
just
aren't all that curious, right?
like,
uh,
aren't you just curious about, one level deeper?
yeah, yeah. I think that's probably true in all walks of life, I guess, and
Yeah.
in all careers. But talk a little bit about the show. I know it's about a new episode about once a month or a little bit more
Once a month.
frequently.
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah. So talk a
Sure.
little
Well,
bit
How
about it.
It's Done, a podcast for curious marketers, was born actually in 2019, and it's kind of analogous to what we're going to talk about with AI and generative
Mm,
AI and how we're using that today. But the whole reason that I started it was podcasting was really coming on the scene really strongly. And I had clients that were asking me about podcasting and should they do a podcast? And, I was like, I guess if I'm going to answer that question, maybe I'll just start a podcast so I know from the ground up what does it take to do a podcast, so that I can guide my clients and advise my clients, even if they don't use me to do the podcast for them. But I also, in the same time, I thought, but if clients are interested in that, I'll learn by doing my own podcast. And then we could offer that as a service. And so then I would know how much time is involved. So I could know how to price it, how to, set expectations with clients, all those things. And then the other thing was, and then I thought, well, I could also use it as, a marketing tool for my own agency. And being a former journalist, I love asking people questions and I love learning. And I'm always so curious and sometimes to the point where it can be distracting. But so all of those things really combined, to birth the How It's Done podcast. And then one of our core values is be curious. So I think that core value actually sort of came from the work that I was doing, trying to come up with that sort of tagline, a podcast for curious marketers, because I wanted the podcast to be, definitely geared toward my clients and customer base and my industry and audience, healthcare B2B. But I also wanted it to be broader than that anybody that was in marketing and had a curiosity, that they could get something out of it. And then I wanted it to also allow me an excuse to go out and ask to talk to interesting people, either whether they're my clients or, just people that I'm like really admire. And so it's a combination of guests. It's sometimes internal marketing communications experts, typically at a healthcare company. It's sometimes vendors. It is sometimes just leaders in the space. I did a podcast recently on femtech and the rise of femtech, and I talked to three amazing women who are in kind of that femtech space. And I really am so interested in what's going on in that space and like why is that so, such a hot on the scene last couple of years. So, and sometimes I've even had policy wonks on to come and talk about what's going on in healthcare. So, truly curious marketers in the healthcare B2B space would be interested in those things as well. What's coming down the pipe,
Sure.
what's be coming out of DC, because, I'll go back to my journalism roots where they always said when you're doing a story, especially anything kind of investigative, it was like follow the money. So follow the policy and you will follow the money. You will know where the ball is moving. And generally, um, that's your answer as to why, think different things are trending, especially
Right.
in healthcare. Yeah.
Right, right. That's so true. I actually, I don't know if we talked about this way when we met, but I actually spent 20 years in the newspaper business. So
I
not as a
like you,
not,
Carol.
I know, not as a journalist. I was definitely on the dark side, the sales and marketing side. But I am a curious person, so it
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
makes a difference. So it's interesting. So I when we met at Sway, I think we and along with everybody else I think a hot topic. Well, first of all, AI was a trend everywhere, of course, in the various tracks. But there was a lot of conversation around. the usage of AI and generative AI specifically in the creation or a starting point for press communications and white papers and basically content marketing types of initiatives. And there were some strong opinions on both sides of the coin there, right? And there were even healthcare systems that were there going, well, if you're going to use, Chat GPT to partially write or do a first draft of my press release, shouldn't you charge me less? So there was just a very interesting question that had never come up before. I've been attending this event for years in one form or the other, and this was the first year that these sort of questions came up around generative AI, especially. It's a hot, AI usage in healthcare is just a big topic now anyway. And lo and behold, as I'm on your website and checking out your show, how it's done, I see an episode from March where your guest talked specifically about this topic, the ethical use of AI in basically marketing communications. So let's talk about that because I think it is interesting. I think most marketers are very curious about people's opinions or how they're using generative AI in their workflow and their activities. So first and foremost, your guest could just share a little bit about his background and what you talked for almost an hour, and I listened to every word of it actually.
Oh, you did. Oh, that's great.
Yeah. What he had to share.
So my guest was Todd O'Neill, and he leads the interactive media department at MTSU, Middle Tennessee State University. I'm in Nashville, and MTSU is just right outside of Nashville in Murfreesboro, and they have a really, really strong communications program. And a little backstory on how, I even got to him and found him and got him on the show is one of his students was an intern at Fuoco, and he is now, I am proud to say, a full-time Marcom specialist here at Fuoco. And he's super curious, which I love about him. And we were mapping out a whole series of podcasts on AI. And so he mentioned that he thought his professor would be a great guest. I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. Can you reach out to him and just see if he'd be interested? So that's how I even got to know Todd. And so when he came on, I was just blown away, by him and what a great guest he was on this topic, because he's got to stay up on the latest to be able to teach his students, and things are changing. Really, it seems kind of like daily, in AI and generative AI. And so he and his team, they just stay on top of it. So I could have talked to him for 2 hours. I mean,
Yeah.
I need to have him back on the show. But anyway, we kind of honed in on the PRSA had just come out with fairly, like right before that podcast, the ethical use of AI in PR. And so I had, read that, and we really honed in on the ethical use of of AI in marketing and PR. And for your listeners, if you haven't, and you probably haven't listened to that podcast yet, it is definitely worth a listen. I found it super interesting. One thing that he brought up that I had not ever really thought about before that interview was when you're out there, like on, open AI, Chat GPT, that you really need to be careful about what you put out there, especially when you are leveraging that tool for your clients, because of course, anything you put out there is fair game, right? It's out in the public. And you don't want to, if you're leveraging it as a starting point for a press release, for example, you would not want to include the name of your client, especially if it's a publicly traded company. There's so many sensitivities, to that, and so many potential implications to that. You don't want to give away too much from the standpoint of the thing that you're going to be announcing, the whole reason you might be doing a press release, because you don't want to give away any kind of trade secrets or market secrets or, anything like that. And even if you are maybe leveraging ChatGPT to maybe write some original content around some new product that's coming to market, you wouldn't want to include the client name or the specific product name and things like that. And when he started, kind of going down that path, I was like, oh, wow, I had never thought about that, but that makes sense.
Right.
And then, the other things are, do you let your clients know that you've used ChatGPT? Do you put a
Right.
disclaimer? I think that's a really valid topic, obviously. I don't think that you need to do that for every little thing. I think that I can equate it to plagiarism, right?
Right.
You can go out and search the internet for all kinds of things. You can research all kinds of information online, offline, whatever you're going to use to then write your piece, whatever it is, a white paper, an abstract, a press release. I mean, on and on and on down the line, but you can't plagiarize and you can't not give credit. So I think one thing about OpenAI is it can be hard to give credit where credit is due because you don't really always know where that information is coming from, right? But you're also not going to plagiarize. So I think those are the kinds of things that we have to talk more about and keep in mind as we're using these tools. I am so excited about how we can leverage all of these tools in generative AI to be smarter, better, faster. And the smarter, better, faster, especially the faster part, really frees us up to do what we do best, which is use our brains and
Right.
get ideas and take those kernels of ideas and do something with those, that's truly differentiating, unique for our clients. And also I find that, just in playing around with the tools, that if the tools will sometimes surface pathways of a story, of a narrative that I hadn't thought about before. And I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. I hadn't thought about that before. Let me pursue that.
Yeah, and all of what you're talking about too, these conversations that were very robust at the conference that we attended, especially around this idea of quote original content. You know, most of the agencies and marketing companies that I spoke to there use it as a tool, meaning to get I don't like using the word first draft because that sort of feels a little plagiaristic to me, but
Yeah, yeah, I hear
yeah,
you.
yeah. But this idea of, like you said, oh, that just took me down. And honestly, as you get better at script writing, it can take you down a different avenue of thinking. And if and I remember thinking to myself, if I'm the client, with a paying relationship with a marketing company or an agency, I mean, do I want them spending a lot of brain power doing a press release? No, I want them to use their brains to be creative and think of something new and different and more interesting ways to market and promote me. So I totally get the tool idea. I think, but I agree with you. I think this idea of what constitutes original content is at the I think in the PR and communication side and the marketing side too, because you could use it to write a white paper too, right? For content
Mhm.
marketing or a blog
And
post or
email
whatever.
campaigns and
Yeah, email,
landing
all
pages
of it, right?
and whatever requires.
Right. I mean, you can do a LinkedIn post and use AI generate social media. I guess to me, it does get back to that um, what constitutes original content. And it feels like that is at the heart of the matter here.
I think that's at the heart of the matter. And also, I think, discernment. Because
Oh, yeah,
just
yeah,
because just because AI spits out something that sounds awesome, is it accurate?
right.
And, as a former journalist, accuracy is everything. Devil's in the details. Accuracy is paramount. And accuracy goes way beyond, Are things spelled right? Do you have people's titles right? Do you have the facts right? Because then you have to layer on context. Is it contextually accurate? And that's where I think, just as I experiment with these tools, or, people on my team may experiment and they, send things back. And even before AI, when people on my team maybe submitted things for my review, I'm like, okay, so the facts are correct, but the context is off.
Yeah.
And here's why, go back and look at XYZ. And I think that is super, super duper important.
Right. Kriste, we're going to have to actually, I think, do a part 2 to our series because believe it or not, we're just about out of time.
Oh my gosh.
No, I know it's a fast 30 minutes, but before we end, just, give us a 30-second close out like what's next for you in the agency and the podcast.
Sure. Thank you. So what's next for the agency? My number one word right now is focus. We are pursuing a focus on how we are leveraging AI, generative AI, as well as all the different tools that we use across the board, across PR and marketing, and really focusing in on unique ways that we can bring those tools to work together to do some pretty cool things for our clients. And so to do that, I've been reading this book 10 times is easier than 2 times. And it's basically the reason that 10 times is easier than 2 times is because if you only want to grow 2 times, just keep doing what you're doing and, you'll grow. But if you want to go 10 times, you got to focus and you got to know what to say no to, and you got to say, what are we going to do to get there? And I'm like, okay, that's it. And I got to tell you, it was shameless plug again for Sway Health Conference in May. I got this moment of clarity so bad, so big from that conference. And I was sharing that with John Lynn when I was leaving. He's like, oh, great. That's amazing. That's exactly what we want. So focus, that's what's next, and continuing to innovate and do things a little differently.
Oh, Kriste, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Carol, for having me. I've really enjoyed it. I would love to come back.
Yeah, we got to do a part 2. Yeah, for sure. You can learn more about Kriste Goad and her company and her podcast at growwithfuoco.com. And be sure to follow her on LinkedIn. You can learn more about this show on the program page on healthcarenowradio.com, and always be sure to connect me on LinkedIn. I love hearing from you. Until next time, I want to know what's your